Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Quantum Leap Season 1, Episode 14, known as SOS. We are to come to have Ben leap into 1989 as a operations officer, or a commander, technically, because, of course, we would come to find that Ben has leapt into a naval officer known as Rossi, and he is to, of course, be a operations officer, or third in uh, command of this warship. So Ben is to go on and running around, not exactly knowing what he's doing, to then find that Addison, once we further and further have Ben making his way back to the bridge of this ship, Addison is to know exactly where Ben is, and is to know certain people upon the ship. And Ben is like, well, how do you know that? Come to find out, Addison is to be looking at uh, Ben working side by side with her own father, Exo Alexander Augustine, who is Brendan Ralph. A lot of people probably know him as Superman from Superman Returns, and at certain points he would have gone on and done a cluster of the CW shows, as him being either Ray Palmer's The Atom, or even when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths, he became Superman one more time. Kind of the Kingdom Come Superman, but Superman nonetheless. So we would also have Brendan Ralph kind of be on The Rookie, the Nathan Fillion show. But anyways, I don't want to go through Brendan Ralph's entire IMDb roster of things that he's gone on and done in the time of which that he's been a person. Definitely, I would recommend also you listening or going to the YouTube channel of Michael Rosenbaum's Inside of You, where he interviewed Brendan Ralph, where he goes on and talks about doing Superman Returns, because that story was freaking crazy. How he would go on and talk about the director and kind of what he was going through at that time doing that film is really rather interesting. So, Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum. Check it out. So, we would go on to have there being, of course, a lot of technical jargon throughout this episode, so much so that it makes me miserable in thinking that I would have to go on to repeat any of this jargon from this episode. We would also state that there is quite a bit of certain emotional moments in this episode, which I thought was great. This show goes on and does two miracles, and I will go on and list them now. One miracle is we have had a person that I've been complaining about, hasn't been on the show, and boom, wouldn't you know it, he is to be on this episode. We have Leaper X that is on the episode. Isn't that a miracle of life? Wow. And then the second miracle, of course, would come into the fact that we really do, in this episode more so than others, have the Behind the Leap people actually helping out Ben within his leap. We really find out that throughout most of this episode, it seems that Magic is to try to get down to figuring out how he can go on and help Ben. We have Addison, who knows things about Ben's leap, and like useful characters for frickin' once. Good grief. We're also to try to have Ian trying to figure out how Ben somehow figured out a way to leap into a specific time period. We're still trying to figure that out because it seems that the further and further Ben is helping all these people, it is eventually going to take him to a certain time period to find somebody, which we would naturally hope is either to be Sam Beckett or is to either be helping out Addison, because supposedly we still have that possibility that Addison is in danger, and that's the reason why Ben had leaped when he was not even supposed to, because he was supposed to be the Addison person, and then Addison was supposed to be the Ben person. Again, from the early parts of this show. So, we have me want to go on and go into just spoilers of this episode. What, of course, would be the grading of this episode? I would say that the episode is okay. I feel that this episode is really tailored to a specific audience, and I feel like the common person is probably, for the most point, going to get lost. So good job on doing this episode show to really just be tailoring to a very small portion of people instead of a mass amount. It seems kind of, you would think a wider audience would be a smarter thing to try to reach out to, but I get it. Like, they would probably just state, it's like, well, hey, this is just a one-off thing. This is a one-off episode. And hey, like, we love the military, and of course, I would state that also. I appreciate everybody who's in the military. I would, of course, have a dad that would have spent 20 years of his life in the Navy. So yeah, as a submariner. So definitely, I am to be a military supporter, of course. But so, anyways, we would need me to go on and just double fire this bad boy up. I'm going to try as quickly as possible to just ram through this episode. I apologize also for me possibly being behind in covering this episode, because this show goes on hiatus so freaking often that I don't even remember when this show is even on anymore. Plus, also, there are so many things that I am covering or trying to cover every single day. Plus, also dealing with so many things that I am also dealing with beyond me just doing videos. Things just get freaking difficult, so my apologies. So, with that said, let's just go on, double fire this bad boy up, and get this one in the can, so to speak. So, let's double fire this one. It's about that time, of course, to go on and go to spoiler time. Spoiler time is about that time to spoil this episode. So, Ben is to land himself onto this warship that is to seemingly be in the midst of battle. Ben is freaking out, and he is to be told that he is ops, and it's like, what the heck does that even mean? And so we have him be operations manager, or operations officer, my bad. So Ben is scrambling, going on and talking to certain sailors, officers, and so on and so forth. So eventually, when Ben is to make his way to the bridge of this warship, we go on to have Ben find out that all of this was just some drill. So Addison is to go on and call Ben over, like, hey, she whistles him over bizarrely. Which I don't really understand why she whistled. She could have immediately just said, hey, Ben, over here. Because she can talk, because... But maybe that's just like, well, they did the whistle, maybe to not interfere with other dialogue going on. So Ben goes off with Addison, and while they're walking around, we have Ben find out that that, hey, I'm Rossi, like, what can you tell me about where I'm at? So we, of course, have Ziggy, who has just become this unreliable crap machine, where you can't even trust what Ziggy is even telling you. So we would go on to luckily have Addison, who is kind of hearing over the intercom, the captain talking to his men, going on and giving him this speech, and we would come to find that Addison is to have this speech sound very familiar to her. Then she rushes off to go to the bridge with both Ben, and then she realizes immediately that this is Captain Bill Drake, and this is to be on the U.S. This ship is to be the USS Montana, and Ben is a little bit confused of how it seems that Addison would know all this, and we would go on to, of course, have Addison say it's like, well, that's because that right over there is to be my dad, is to be my father, is to be Exo Alexander Augustine. So that's how it seems that verbatim Addison is to know all this. And more than likely, if you are to know a person that is probably in the military, they are too often to have quite a bit of the stories that they are to go on and tell you quite often. It's the same story that you just continue to hear. I don't know how many times that I've gone on and heard like 4 different stories quite often. Or it's just somehow worked into a conversation or something. That is just what it is. You just have to go on and like, oh, okay, all right, well, that's, I guess, a connection that you can go on to make there. But also, I would probably do the same, but like, oh, yeah, I can relate that to some movie that I saw. Oh, yeah. And they're just like, okay, well, all right, cool. Moving on. So we would have both Magic and Addison telling us where this story is going, because uh, in the behind the leap scene we have Magic, who is stating on May 2nd, 1989, we would of course have the USS Montana, who is to get a distress call from a submarine called Tampa. And so it seems that this ship was to go on and ignore that submarine distress call and would kill a number of sailors upon a submarine, forcing, of course, Alexander into the XO into a retirement because of that huge mistake. But come to find out, the XO would want to go on and find those people with that distress call, and Ben is very baffled about, okay, why is it that like Alexander is to be going down for this? But so we would have Magic that is to relay that to Ian and Jen, and so Ian is trying to figure out how that Ben is to have possibly figured out somehow or another how he can go on into leaping into a certain time period, and somehow Ben had to have figured it out. But anyways, so that's the one thing that they kind of toss in there, just as like, instead of just relaying what is to be going on in the leap completely, it's like, well, hey, whatever you guys were saying in prior episodes, let's bring that back a little bit. Then we'll forget about it and we'll just go into the focus of this episode. So Addison is to also relay this to Ben and is to tell him about the Tampa sub, that Ben has to figure out a way to have the ship go after this submarine and help these people. So we would go on to have Ben, who when they get the stress call, we would have Ben, who's like, okay, you have to argue to try to get this distress call, and so the XO Alexander's like, yeah, let's do that distress call, and Ben's like, what? Like, I thought I was gonna have to debate this, but no, I guess not. Alexander goes on and takes the distress call, and Captain Bill Drake is to be just like, no, 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 like, don't go on and take that distress call, because we don't know if that's really a friend or foe. Like, that could be a fake distress call trying to get us into Chinese waters, and we would come to find in the water there is to also be this Chinese sub that seems to be waiting and lurking in that area. So we would have both Alexander and we would have both the Master Chief that is going on and having this debate between one another. That it seems Bill Drake is getting worse. And Alexander's like, no, 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 like, he's fine, like we're gonna work through this. And so eventually Ben is to go on and ask Alexander, it's like, what do you mean? What did you guys have a debate about? How, like, he's getting worse? What did the Master Chief mean by that? So we'll get to that here shortly. So we would come to find that Ben would be talking to Alexander and want to have them go after this ship. And so Alexander is to eventually relate to Ben. It's like, well, hey, you have to figure out a way that this distress call is from one of ours instead of the Chinese. So Ben goes on and is to realize that certain ships are to have certain frequencies, and so they go on and they figure out that the distress call is from a frequency that is to be friendly instead of an enemy. So Ben relays that, and so they're like, okay, let's go after this ship. So let's get our friends, let's help them out. But then bizarrely we have Captain Bill Drake, who is to want to go on and launch these torpedoes to hit this Chinese submarine, because it seems to be getting closer and closer to them. But what they are to go on and possibly think are to be Chinese submarines are to actually just be mines that are in this location. So we have, of course, Bill Drake that wants to go on and destroy this submarine that is, of course, to be this Chinese submarine. And we would go on to have the ship getting hit by something. But we would come to find out that the ship is to not be hit by a torpedo. Instead, it's just a mine. And eventually, we have Ben who figures that out, that it's just a mine. And he finds that out via Magic. Magic is to go on and meet with a man called Li Wei, and so we would have Magic that states that right in the location that the sub was at, there was a bunch of mines that had gotten away from the Chinese. And I want to be sensitive here. I hope that I'm not offending anybody by saying things a certain way for this episode. I'm just trying to rush through it. My bad. So we have Magic who is calling to relate to Jen. It's like, well, hey, all of those things are mines. So Ben is to go on and tell Alexander that all these things are mines. We also have Ben. We also have Alexander, who, when seemingly uh, Bill Drake is the captain, is to want to continue to fire upon this Chinese submarine, we have Alexander who is to put the anchor down, and the whole ship shifts. We go on to then have Bill Drake who is to put Alexander in the brig, and so we have where it seems that Alexander is to be the only one in this entire ship who can turn things around. So Ben is to go on and talk to Alexander, and so Alexander, it seems, is to have possibly been confined to his quarters, because we would come to find that instead of the brig, he, I guess, is to maybe just be confined to his quarters. We have a bunch of pictures of Addie, as he calls her, who is Addison, in his room. So, which, in all honesty, if this is to actually be a person's room, like I would assumed it would just be like any normal submarine part of a ship, where like it would just be like a bunch of just sleeping beds, kind of one stacked on top of the other, instead of there being an actual room here. But maybe that's because I didn't really know much of uh, certain luxuries of certain commands, I guess, on certain ships, because I has spent some time in a submarine before, and yeah, you would just kind of get these bed racks, like one under the other, and like that's uh, eventually where a lot of the guys would just go on and sleep in a submarine. But again, it would probably be very different when you would go on and have certain ranks in a ship. But still, moving on. So we would come to have Ben, who is talking to Alexander and talking about Addison, and we would eventually also come to find that Ben is like, well, hey, like about the captain, what were you talking about him for, that he's getting worse? And so Alexander would go on and state that his father was a horrible guy. And so Alexander would talk about the darkness that is laying inside of him, that he always just kind of worries about, because he is to feel that it might just be this hereditary thing, that if his father was an a-hole, that he'll be an a-hole too, and he will probably pass that off to his kids, because hereditary, I guess. The a-hole is to be hereditary, I guess. So, or the darkness, as Alexander is to state. So, we come to find that Alexander's father was very abusive. When it got to the point where finally Alexander fought back, he then ran off to the Navy, to the military. And we would come to find that Alexander would find Captain Bill Drake as a father figure to him, and so Alexander cannot go on and easily just like swayed away, or whatever, what is the right word. Alexander will never want to just give up on the captain, because Alexander is to see this guy as a father figure to him. So we have Ben, that eventually is to like realize, like, yeah, I don't think he's gonna turn. I don't think he's gonna do a mutiny. But Ben, further and further, the times that he is to go on and speak with Alexander, he's just like, well, here's the thing, like, you're talking about your darkness, and we come to find out that Alexander realizes that his wife doesn't even love him anymore, and it's just really hard for him to like thinking about his daughter and thinking about his wife, and also just being in the Navy. So we have Alexander realizing that like it's going to be hard when he eventually goes back home. So we have Ben that is to go on of like, well, hey, like you're talking about your daughter and you're talking about your captain, you're talking about the darkness. So, and Alexander is to go on and have this like hymn that he is to have stated to his daughter to make her less afraid, and Addison tells Ben that. So Ben kind of uses that hymn against Alexander. It's like, well, hey, like, why can't you go on and do what is best for your own captain? Realizing that this guy is not right, and doing what's best for the crew. Like this is going into territory of like this guy is being dangerous for the rest of your crew. So what are you gonna do about it? And so Alexander is like, like us like trying to go up against the captain, like that's mutiny. And it's like, yeah, like call it what you will, like you can't dress it up and whatever of any of that nature, but let's go on and let's do this because it's right, and it's trying to prevent World War III. So I'm very heavily paraphrasing here. Addison keeps stating that it's like, yeah, we're gonna start World War III. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen now. So we just have to really just figure this freaking out. So we have both Ben and Alexander like kind of getting around these guards. And we have at one point where Ben is to be grabbed by these men as Alexander is to be rushing to the bridge. So we have Alexander that goes on and is to have an emergency stop. And so finally, Alexander goes on to confront the captain. And the further and further they talk here, and we have Ben who's kind of witness to this, we have the captain realize that he is making a grave mistake, and then he is to relieve himself of duty and is to give everything over to Alexander, and he goes off. To where even all of the other officers that are underneath the captain, they don't want to go on and do anything that he's telling them to do. So, like, everybody is just kind of like, no, like, I'm just going to put my hands behind my back and not do what you're telling me, which is basically like the whole ship is to realize that the captain is to be maybe even emotionally compromised, if you want to go in the Star Trek possibly term of things, where Bill Drake is to want to create World War III because something is not going well with him and his wife. And so that is to, of course, cause Bill to want to just go to war because he's a guy on the edge. So Alexander is to go on and try to get to the distress call, but once they realize that there are so many mines around them and they really have to figure out a way to perfectly orchestrate around them, we come to find that Ben is to find a frequency to just be able to destroy all of these mines when the ship gets further and further nearby. The problem is that the ship cannot go on and use the radar and use the frequency that Ben is going to use. So, luckily for Ben, Ben figures out the frequency. It all works out. they continue to go on and find the sub and rescue all these people. And so by the end of this, we go on to have Ben, who is to be on the deck of this carrier, or this warship, carrier warship. There's so many technical terms. And so he goes on to, of course, meet up with a Lieutenant Walker, I believe, who is to actually be Leaper X. So Leaper X goes on and is to almost kind of thank Ben in a way, because uh, he was on that submarine. And so Leaper X goes on and tells Ben, it's like, well, hey, like, it seems that your people had met me in the past. I couldn't imagine that anything that they were to go on and ask me was to have any real benefit to them, or get any intel of who I am at this point in time. So we have Leaper X that technically goes on to thank Ben, and then leaps as Ben is to soon leap himself. And then we come to find that Ben is a public defender, and he is to have a person who is asking him a question, and we have the episode just kind of end with Ben realizing that he is in some hot water here, because this might again be another place where he is to maybe be out of his depth. Other than that, I think I would finally just go on and just get the heck out of here. Try to leave this as short as possible, but also realizing that I probably did not do at all a good job of talking anywhere about this episode. But I just wanted to just get it as quickly done as possible, with also trying to remember any of the stuff that happened in this episode. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about this episode, whether you hated it, whether you loved it, whether you were just whatever for this one. Maybe there might be a lot more interesting things being played out within the next episode, more so than this one. With that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, buddy. Bye, buddy.